trying to make it as a psychedelic band. They were already well known in the London underground, both for their unusual multimedia shows and their first single. It was a song called Arnold Lane, written by the group's guitarist Syd Barrett. The subject? A pervert transvestite who stole ladies' underwear from wash lines. The single didn't sell much, but it did launch one of the most important musical careers of the 70s. The story of Pink Floyd, when rock and roll never forgets, continues. The roots of Pink Floyd go back to 1964, the year of Beatlemania. At the time, Rick Wright, Roger Waters, and Nick Mason were studying architecture at London's Regent Street Polytechnic School. In their spare time, they played rock and roll. And Roger says, for him, it wasn't just for fun.
I was doing it with the idea, I'm going to be a rock and roll star. I think everybody who ever puts a rock band together is really that's the genuine motivation. But you might pretend that it's just a bit of fun, but I think deep within you there's a hankering after all that.
Rick, Roger, and Nick were joined by a young art student, Syd Barrett, who named the group Pink Floyd after his favorite blues record, a song by Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. By 1967, as Roger Waters recalls, they were becoming a part of the London psychedelic scene, pioneering the fusion of rock with intricate, spacey visuals.
We were doing light shows just in a little church hall, in the All Saints Church Hall in Palace Gardens in Notting Hill Gate. In fact, that's where we started to gain some kind of popularity in London. We started doing these. We would play there once a week, and it snowballed incredibly quickly. That was using liquid slides and stuff, which nobody was doing at all. Nobody was doing anything like that. And I think the architectural school had some kind of input. I can remember building sort of equilateral triangle-shaped screens, with white muslin over them and playing around with all that kind of thing, even in those days. But it snowballed very quickly. There were sort of 20 people there the first week and 150 the second week. And the third week, you couldn't get anywhere near the place. People had heard there was this band of lunatics doing these weird things. In fact, if one could listen to a tape of it now, it was very, very ordinary musically. It's just that we got away from the 3-minute format, which almost everybody was still doing. There were no kind of extended solos in pop music in those days.
In '68, the underground lifestyle got the better of Syd Barrett, and he retired from the group to be replaced by David Gilmour. In the years that followed, Pink Floyd became one of the most important underground bands in the world, entering new creative territory with their combination of complex music and spectacular multimedia shows. But it wasn't until 1973 that they attained great commercial success, ironically with a song about the proverbial root of all evil.
There aren't many rock musicians who are terribly inclined to be artistic, in my experience. But yes, they're more inclined to be interested in other things than, mind you, they're all bloody interested in money, but not very interested in maybe in how to hang on to it or how to make sure that other people aren't stealing it from them. Because normally, successful bands have a number of people around them who are just telling them that they're wonderful and that you want a Rolls Royce, sure, kid, go and pick one out. Don't worry about the money. We'll see. It's all right, And they end up 5 years later with nothing, with no idea what happened to it all and where it all disappeared to. And of course, the answer is that in most cases that it gets stolen from them by unscrupulous management. You look at the end of the year, our first year as professional musicians, we sat down and looked at, what we'd made during the year, and we'd made £7 a week each. We'd had a number 5 single, and we thought, whoa, hold on a minute, there's something wrong with all of this. I remember on Fridays, there used to be everybody would go in and get their check. We used to get £30 a week. And we knew most of the checks were going to bounce. So everybody would go in and pretend not to be making for the door. Because everybody would then leave the office and get to their bank as fast as they could and express their check to try and get the £30 through before the checks started bouncing. It was ludicrous.
Its immense success was accompanied by a triumphant tour of the world as millions experienced firsthand the magic of a Pink Floyd concert. But not without danger. Pink Floyd was known as much for their spectacular multimedia stage shows as for their music. They were one of the first major groups to use multi-speaker wraparound sound, lasers, and other visual effects. Things like crashing aircraft, an inflatable man with blazing green eyes, and a gong which burst into flames. It all took a lot of planning, and as Roger Waters recalls, was not without danger.
You can't have a spontaneous burning gong. You have to wire the thing up with a small charge, And I remember the early one, where later models were worked on propane or something. We drilled a load of holes around the frame of this huge gong and would just run gas through it and light it with a charge and some transformation powder. But the early one, the frame of the gong was wrapped in asbestos rope, which used to be soaked with lighter fluid before we went on stage. It was unbelievably dangerous. There was a famous occasion in the Cobo Hall in Detroit. It was fantastic, where we used to have these bins that we'd had specially made, that were made of mild steel, to put the charges in a number called Careful with the Axe, Eugene. At a particular point, I screamed loudly, and these bangs used to go off behind us. And we'd ordered these bins to have 1/2-inch steel bottoms and 1/4-inch steel sides, and they came back and they were 1/4-inch steel bottoms. So we said, no, that's not enough, and we sent them back. Instead of taking them apart and rebuilding them with 1/2-inch steel bottoms, they put another 1/4-inch steel plate, they think, on top of this one, and it superheated. I've no idea of the physics involved, and inside this bin, holding it down, there was a stage weight, a big 14-pound stage weight, and it exploded. Went off like a bomb. There was nothing left of this bin. It just disappeared. The top of the bass cabinet that it was standing on, which was made of 3/4-inch marine ply, it just wasn't there anymore. There was a guy, how nobody was killed, we will never know. There was a guy sitting 30 rows back in the audience, copped a piece of this, marine ply, hit him in the stomach. All the speakers, every single speaker in the gear blew immediately. I just remember feeling this hot blast on the back of my head and seeing the back of the Hammond organ in slow motion go spiraling up into the air. Because the audience thought it was fantastic. They thought it was absolutely wonderful. They were on their feet for, seemed like hours. I couldn't hear them, of course, because I couldn't hear anything. And in the reviews, and we then, that was the end of the first set. That was it. There was nothing we could do. And we managed to change a few speakers and go on and do another set later on. The guy who'd had this thing in his stomach came back from hospital to watch the rest of the show. And it was in the reviews the next day, it described this moment as being the highlight of the show. The Floyd let off a howitzer at the climax of their first set. And in fact, it was an absolute miracle that nobody was killed.
Pink Floyd, and a track written by the entire band, drummer Nick Mason, guitarist David Gilmour, keyboard player Rick Reich, and bass player Roger Waters.
Playing has really always been the least important bit of it all for me. I mean, that technical side of playing. I like the idea of having a bass or a guitar in my hands and making loud, expressive noises at exactly the right moment with them, but that's really almost as far as my music goes.
What Roger says he likes most is organizing projects and writing.
I like that moment of sitting alone over a piano or a guitar or something, and there's a magical moment when some feeling that you have by some magical process that one can't understand actually expresses itself somehow. That feels kind of out of control. And you get the bones of a song suddenly appear out of nowhere. Obviously it's an eclectic process that you've picked up bits and pieces of melody here and there and feelings about music during your life, and then some feeling expresses itself using all those elements. Then the rest of it isn't quite so enjoyable. All the hard slog of the craft of actually then taking that simple beginning of a song and making it work as a complete thing. But then I enjoy all the organization of producing records, and I enjoy I enjoy organizing shows as well. bringing all the different elements together in order to create a theatrical and musical effect that adequately expresses the feelings that are involved in the songs in the first place.
Like the group's prior works, it had quite an unusual cover. On it were two men shaking hands. What was unusual was the fact that one of them was on fire. The cover for the next Pink Floyd album, Animals, was in that same tradition. It showed a plastic pig flying high above London, and that was no trick photograph. As Roger Waters recalls, the shot actually took place, but not without problems.
This pig was about 45 feet long, filled with helium, and it was suspended over the top of Battersea Power Station, and on a wire. And there was always a possibility that, that something was going to break because nobody built an inflatable like that before. So we had a man standing by with a rifle to shoot the thing down should it escape, to puncture it so that the gas would escape and it would come down. I think he was having his lunch when the wire went. And by the time he got out of his car and, loaded his rifle, it was gone. It was a dot in the sky. It just went whoosh and it was gone. And by that time, London Heathrow were receiving radio messages from incoming planes that there was this pig in the air lanes. And the pig, we had a helicopter there that day, so we sent the helicopter after it to see where it was going. But the pig went up to about 40,000 feet. It was, and luckily there was a safety valve on it which blew then and released some of the gas. And it came down, and the helicopter lost it, and it was heading out towards Holland. And it actually came down at dusk. A farmer was gathering in his flocks, not sheep, he was gathering cows. He was bringing cows back for milking at dusk, and this thing floated down in the field beside him. And to his eternal credit, he just took its halter and led it back to the farm, and he tied it up to a gatepost and rang the police. And word finally got back to us, and we sent somebody down to fold it up and bring it back. As
time went on, more and more of Pink Floyd's writing and creative direction came from Roger Waters, culminating in the landmark album, The Wall. In 1978, Roger Waters was the most important creative force in Pink Floyd. He'd taken over much of the writing and producing. In fact, The Wall, his largely autobiographical work, was almost a solo album.
When I'd made the demos, I made on my own, I made, just working on a multi-track tape recorder on my own, I made demos of The War and the pros and cons of hitchhiking. And then I wrote all the lyrics out in books, sets of books, and then I went into the rest of the guys in the band, you see, and played them the two tapes with books of words for them to follow. And at the end of that meeting, or at the end of that listening, I then said, right, I'm going to do one of these as a solo project, and I'm going to do one of them with a band. Which one do you want to do? And they chose The Wall.
A good choice, since The Wall went on to become one of the biggest selling records of the past decade, in spite of the fact that the film, written by Waters, starring Bob Geldof, never attained much commercial or critical success. For many people, The Wall was Pink Floyd's last stand. Though they've recorded together since, they've now gone their separate ways. To some, Pink Floyd was one of rock's most important, innovative bands. To others, just a colorful sideshow. Roger Waters isn't sure how the future will judge Floyd, and in part, he blames the press.
We've been largely ignored by the media during our lifetime. If you read any article about anything about them, no mention is ever made of Pink Floyd. We're never included in the same sentences as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Who, for instance. And yet, that's up to them. You see, a lot of rock and roll, there's a segment of rock and roll that is about the way the media respond to it, right? So the Rolling Stones, for instance, are a far more important part of rock and roll than we are, because Mick Jagger is one of the world's great publicity seekers, and he's perfect pigeonholable copy, and probably will be for another 10 years. It's absolutely perfect stuff for them, and the thing of how they were rebels and this and that and the other. The fact that they've never sold many records is irrelevant to the media, because that's enough. You can do great picture stories in life about Mick Jagger, because he's happy to kind of run around in a tracksuit, and that's, the whole thing is about that. And so the way media have respond to rock and roll bands has a lot to do, I suspect, with the way history will look at them. Because historians, generally speaking, their sources tend to be the written word, because that's what history is. It's writing. And so if all the writing that's been done contemporarily about the bands that existed in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, the history that will get written will be taken from what was written now. And nobody's written about us, and partly because we, generally speaking, have refused to cooperate in any way with them. Well, no, I think largely because of that. I think it's largely a thing about non-cooperation.